book for Port Haven, the Star Wars Refuge, is book club. Today we are going to begin our discussion of Most Wanted by Rae Carson. Now we're going to talk about Most Wanted for two reasons. One, Rae Carson is the author behind the Rise of Skywalker novelization, which is going to come out in a little bit. And two, I really love this book and I've been looking for an excuse to reread it. And it's a book that I think deserves more love on the internet. So that's really the reasoning behind my choice. As I said, Carson is going to be doing the Tross novelization. She's also written a story in the Canto Bight compilation and did a story in FactBob. As far as I'm aware, that's what she's done in Star Wars so far, but she's done a bunch of stuff outside of Star Wars as well. So if you like her writing in Star Wars and you can't get enough, there's plenty more outside of Star Wars as well. Also, super fun person to follow on Twitter, but just that's a complete aside. But I want to get started talking about the book. A little bit of backstory before we begin. This book was a part of the lead-in to Solo, a Star Wars story. So you may remember episode 7, 8, and 9, they all had like the Journey to series, right? Journey to The Force Awakens, Journey to The Last Jedi, and they were labeled as such. Both Rogue One and Solo had these as well. They just weren't labeled Journey to, but they all had a Del Rey published novel and a Disney publishing novel, which would be like regular novel and YA novel, as well as comics, even though they didn't have like the big branding. So this was a part of the stories that led into Solo, although this was actually, at least in the US, published the same day that the movie hit general audiences in theaters. So you typically would not have read this unless you had seen the film first. Though I'm sure there were exceptions to that. So this was written specifically to be supplemental material for Solo, and it really gets into Han and Qi'ra and their friendship before Solo, and their rivalry before Solo, and where their bond comes from that you see in that film. It's great, because you jump between their two perspectives, and this will be my second time reading it, but I loved it the first time, and so I'm excited to talk about it again. With that, let's jump into the first chapter. I have a lot to say about the first chapter, both from a story perspective and just a general writing perspective. I'm going to start with the general writing before I get into too much about what's going on in the story itself. But I really like the very beginning of the book is Han running on the street, and it makes me think of the opening shot of Solo is Han, hijacking a speeder so he can run on the street. I like that both of these things are kind of starting in the same place with the very, very much the same energy. This idea that we're meeting Han Solo and he's on the run because something has gone awry. And we don't really know what's gone awry. We don't necessarily get to know in these first couple of chapters. Something's gone awry because it's Han Solo. And I love that we start there. And this book has to do something really, really difficult. So this book has to really quickly let you know that this is Han Solo. So typically when you have a book, the first couple of chapters, it's all like the introduction, getting to know the people, introducing you to new characters. This time we have to get to know a character that everybody knows. Like, you cannot see Star Wars and know who Han Solo is because of Harrison Ford. So this is one of the most iconic characters in all of Star Wars, and immediately what has to happen is, instead of introducing the audience, the readers, to a character, instead of immediately presenting this new, fresh person, you have to make an audience comfortable with who they're reading. And most likely the people who have picked up a book that's a lead-in to a Han Solo movie are people who want to read about Han Solo. So you have people who have a bias to making sure Han Solo is written well, and you have to establish that this is Han right away. And this book manages to do that, not in the first couple of chapters, but like the first couple of pages. I was really astounded, even rereading it, like specifically rereading it with like a book club eye, at how quickly you find yourself with Han Solo. Like I said, it starts out, he's on the run, he has the correct path back to the White Worm's Den, or the risky path, right? He's like, oh, I'll take a shortcut, because why not take a shortcut? He's always up for that risk, even though he might get caught by someone. There's a line in the book that says Han's luck would hold up. He was sure of it. Han is so big on instinct, so big on his luck always being there, and you get that right in the beginning. While all this is going on, you're also getting insights into what's going on in Han's life. So Han works for the White Worms gang because they're a bunch of white worms and they have a gang. They're starting to take in humans, or at least species that can go outside in the daylight, taking their kids in to kind of raise them up within this gang and use them. There's so much going on in these first 2 chapters that we read that describe class systems and are kind of, it's both subtle and not subtle. Like, it's really not subtle at all, but like it is at the same time, because it's not really presented in like a socio-political context, I guess is the way I would put it. But, you know, Han's running through the streets, and he's talking about how he wishes the tunnels could be lit, and that they're not lit because the typical members of the White Worm gang don't need lights, and they don't make accommodations for humans. Humans are expected to just kind of keep up with everybody else. Just in a Star Wars context, this is really interesting too, because typically in Star Wars, humans are presented as the majority species throughout the galaxy, or at least in the worlds that we see within the films and a lot of the books, unless you go out into some of the more super unknown region spaces. But here, maybe not on Corellia in general, but certainly within this gang, Han is in the minority being human. And I think this is an important thing when you then look at the movie like Solo: A Star Wars Story, where when he's with the Empire and he has the line of like, oh, we're the invaders, not them, you know, they're the ones who live here. That idea is on Han because he grew up not where humans were in the majority. And I kind of like a connection like that, where you can see how Han's upbringing makes him, or like plays into the character that we see directly in the Solo film. I'll get into that when we get to the second chapter with Qi'ra, but then there's just the class structure on Corellia in general between the rich and the poor, but I'll address that as we hit that point. We also learn that Han is trying to get this promotion. And again, this is kind of a class thing in a way. He's a growing person. He's, you know, human young men eat a lot of food. Like, that's kind of always the stereotype, right? Like, if you have a teenage guy in the house, he's going to eat your whole refrigerator. Han is trying to get this promotion not for power or prestige, but because he wants to eat better. Han is a scoundrel, but he is also always this good guy at heart, and this book is establishing how he can move in these circles and want these things that are typically wanted for poor reasons, bad reasons, I should say, yet he's wanting them for, like, understandable reasons, I guess. So it's just, all of that's happening really fast in just a couple of paragraphs, and it's not something that's necessarily beating you over the head, but if you look for it, it's there, and it's really well done. Then he meets my favorite character in the book, Paulo? I'm not actually sure how to pronounce the character's name. If any of you have listened to the audiobook, if you want to let me know. But despite not knowing if it should be Polo or Paolo or however you would, I'm bad at vowels. But I love this character a lot. Like, the mystery of what this strange man is who lives under the city, and is he human, is he not? I loved that. And I love, you know, here we get Han running on his instincts, like most people would just run. Han's instincts are to, like, stand there and talk it out and try to make friends with this guy. He kind of does, and I guess having a strange underground, maybe cannibal, is not a bad ally to have in your pocket, but it just also speaks to Han's charm. It specifically has the line here too, when in doubt, brazen it out, and I really liked these kind of mottos that Han kept having throughout the story. Then we jump over to Qi'ra's perspective. So I talked about how when you are establishing this book, you have to, like, let people into feeling like an iconic character is the iconic character right away. And that's the challenge. Qi'ra is a different challenge. In theory, it's possible that somebody read the book before seeing Solo: Star Wars Story, in which case you have to explain who Qi'ra is enough. More than likely they have seen Solo, but there's a significant difference between here's a new character from a new movie, now I'm going to hop into this book, versus a character who, at the time this had been written, was in 4 Star Wars movies, plus just simply having a 40-year history of appearing in novels and comics and just living on in people's imagination. It's different So even though people may have had time with Qi'ra before, they don't necessarily know her to the same degree. So now you have to still match a character who has been seen on screen, but you have significantly less content to match her to. And then on top of that, explain her and endear her to an audience. Not that it's particularly hard, because Qi'ra's a great character, but to just contrast somebody new and to put this new character side by side with this iconic character and have your readers accept her is a lot. Because it's not like Han's the main character and then Qi'ra's kind of there. She's not a side character. Like, they're both on the cover for a reason. This is very much a novel about the both of them. And so you have to build her character up in such a way that she can stand on the same ground as Han Solo without the same amount of history to keep her there. Either of these two character writings is a challenge, but then to have the challenge of both of them next to each other is just kind of next level, in my opinion. And I, again, was just, the characterization for Qi'ra is great. I love Qi'ra. Like, I liked Qi'ra when I saw Solo. She was fun. I wanted to know more about her. This book made me love Qi'ra. I mean, right when you meet her, she's going through the food line, and she's like, well, this food's pretty nasty, but it hasn't made me throw up yet, so it's probably fine. Like, she's just so pragmatic. She's so practical. She's so economical. Everything she does is like a flowchart process of how to handle everything, and whether or not she responds positively or negatively to something is on this flowchart. It's really fun. She's a fun character to read how she thinks, because she's the type of character that would really think out everything she thinks. And so there's this way to, even when she doesn't say as much, because that's part of her character, following her thought patterns reveals so much about her, which is why I think she comes across beautifully on screen, but getting to know her in a book added so much, because so much of what she's doing as a character is internal. And she's always evaluating the people around her. We meet two other new characters, brand new characters, of Rebolt and Tuslo. I think Rebolt might actually be in the background in Solo, but he's not a character that people would be like, oh, it's him! So he's effectively a new character for all intents and purposes. We're kind of getting to know about him. Rebolt has these hounds, and I'm pretty sure they would be the hounds that we would then see in Solo, although it's a different character holding them. And Qi'ra, she describes herself as keeping her face always emotionless. This is the part where it's describing how the white worms are taking in more humans, or in Tuslo's, or Sulo. I probably don't need to pronounce the T. The Sulo's Erodian. It's basically species that can go into the sunlight, because white worms can't. And this is a big deal, because what Han and Qi'ra and Rebolt and Sulo are all competing for is the position of head, a head within the gang. That creates its own kind of issue, because a lot of the regulars don't want to take orders from a human or a Rodian, but Proxima is pragmatic and wants somebody who can speak with authority for her, who can go to the surface. And so there's a tension within these four young people who aren't necessarily friends, but they've always interacted with each other because they're the only ones of their kind, or not of the other's kind. And so there's this kind of friendship tension, friendship rivalry tension with them, but then there's also a tension within the gang itself. And so there's that's getting set up there. And then as Rebolt is kind of getting on Han's case, Qi'ra is taking it all in. She knows Han acts on all instinct. She knows the moment that Han gets you feeling defensive is when he's won. And she's watching through all of that. And even later, when Han's trying to get on her nerves, she doesn't let it work, because she knows how to, not let him in. Even if it is bothering her, he doesn't get the satisfaction of it. And so they're having this conversation. I really liked the part, too, where Qi'ra is like, Rebolt, this is what you're doing wrong, because, Han has his secrets, but you have this secret, and Sulo has this secret, and, she has a read on everybody. And it's really cool to see that she does that instinctually, and to watch her kind of naturally not trust people, but also kind of want that camaraderie. I mean, she easily could have been eating by herself. It's just interesting to see how she plays back and forth. It's at this point that Qi'ra and Han both get called in to talk to Lady Proxima. Qi'ra goes in, and just, even though it's obvious that, you know, she, like, serves Proxima, she has a lot of respect for Proxima, she likes that she has, like, heart practical adornments with, like, nice adornments, how she kind of looks up to her in a way. And it's funny because then we leave Qi'ra at this point, we don't see what Kira's up to, but then Han goes in to talk to Proxima, and Han notices, like, the same exact way Proxima is appearing, and Han's like, this is dumb, why are you dressed that way? And I really like just seeing that contrast again of how Qi'ra sees the world versus how Han sees the world. But before Han goes in, we spend a little time with Han. Han's trying to break the silence, just always trying to talk to people, move things along, because he's Han. And so again, we're just getting more of that Han that we're used to seeing, and it's fun to see him when he's younger and spunkier, because it is the same Han qualities, but she doesn't write Han, or Carson doesn't write Han like 1977 Han. Like, this is younger Han. This is younger Han even than Solo: A Star Wars Story. To have those through lines of, like, his character traits, but, you know, he's younger, he has more energy, he's going to do it more, he's going to do it less practiced, less, you know, with a refined scheme in mind. Now we're with Han, we figure out Han has got his chance at making head in the gang, but he has to go to this factory and be undercover and say this code phrase. Han then is, you know, very respectful towards Proxima, says all the right things, bows on his ways out, and it talks about how Han really chafes under having to treat somebody else that way. He doesn't like authority, which is, again, the Han Solo we know, but he's also really good at charming and getting what he wants, and so we kind of see that balance with him. So now, Chapter 2. I just had a lot to say about the first chapter. Chapter 2, there's a lot going on as well. We go to Qi'ra. We find out that Qi'ra has gotten her shot at being ahead as well, where Han was kind of concerned about her. We find out there's no reason to be. And this moment with Qi'ra is one of my favorites in the book. It's a part that stuck with me since I read this book almost 2 years ago. And as much as it's a great book, you know, you don't remember every part of a book after 2 years has gone by, but I remembered this part. And this part meant a lot to me as a reader, where Qi'ra gets these really nice clothes, and she gets to put these nice clothes on for the first time, and gets to put on this nice perfume. The way Qi'ra is written in this book is so intelligent, and I don't just mean Kira's intelligent, and she is, but Qi'ra is a character who is practical above everything else. She's efficient above everything else. But she's not above liking nicer things. She likes the nicer things that Lady Proxima wears, and she likes these nicer clothes. It's really easy when writing a female character like this to say, okay, I need to make her more feminine somehow, so let's stick her in a dress. Or, yeah, she's a tomboy, or she's rough with the guys, but, like, at night she likes to put on a nice evening gown. And that's just something I've kind of gotten sick of reading, as somebody who's kind of always been a tomboy growing up. This is me, and sometimes I like dressing up, but I don't dress up in the same way that's typical for a lot of other people. You know, I just kind of got used to, like, okay, yeah, there's always the tomboy in the story, but the tomboy in the story is just has her moments where she's not, and I just kind of was like, eh. Where Qi'ra has her times where she dresses up like this, but it's not like, I can wear a dress. I can wear nice clothes. I'm in rags all of the time, and now I get to wear something that sets me apart. And that's her own struggle with things she has to do, and that's not necessarily what I'm relating to, but she's so well written because she is a female character with feminine attributes that is doing things that are female character like, that aren't just I've stuck a character in a role and she just happens to be a woman, but done outside of the very typical, we're just gonna make her pretty and that's how we, you know, it's I'll probably talk about it a lot more as we go through the book, because there's just other points where that kind of writing came through that I really, really connected to, and it's part of what I really, really liked about this book, is just profoundly how well written Qi'ra is. And that's a bit more personal than I usually get in some of these videos, but I just had to talk about it because that part meant a lot to me when I read it the first time. And I was happy to get to it again. But to get back to the story itself, the other thing that's going on here that I really like is that Qi'ra has been assigned to be noticed. She's been assigned to wear the nice clothes, go into the luxury place, and have people be seen. Han is the one who's supposed to sneak. Now, logically, if I were sending people on a mission, I would send Han to the place where he's going to get noticed, and I would send Qi'ra to the place where she could sneak, because that's where their strengths are. But Proxima has sent them to do the opposite of what they're good at. Han has to be stealthy, and Qi'ra has to draw attention to herself. And I really liked that switcheroo, and I think it adds some good tension. It certainly does with Qi'ra, because we stay with Qi'ra. We'll get to what happens with Han when we do more reading later. But we go now with Qi'ra on this mission. Qi'ra is noticing there's a lot of Imperial presence on the planet. We see that in Solo. This is kind of the beginnings of that, seeing Star Destroyers there, seeing turrets outside of luxury places, as Corellia starts building more and more Imperial ships. So it's just setting the stage for what's going on in the galaxy at large, even though this is a story more about these characters and it's more of a small scale story. It's still putting it in the context of the larger story that's going on in the galaxy, and that larger story influences the tensions that comes into this more specific story. We see Qi'ra again, she's always evaluating, she's always looking for a backup plan, even if it means she's running a little bit late. Like, she's always going to go, okay, so here's a backup, and I could go that way, and then here's the code to get in the door, and she's already just kind of like taking care of herself so she could get out in a pinch, even though she has no idea whether or not this is going to go right or wrong or what that is. She eventually gets on the tram to go to like the penthouse meeting area, and the planet Corellia is described very vividly as being so polluted, and then they get above the pollution line, and yes, Coronet City is nasty, but then you look to the mountains beyond, and Qi'ra has this moment of realizing my planet is beautiful. And that's this other really important thing, this woman, a young woman, who so badly wants to be more than who she is and wants to be more than a scum rat and might be thinking like Corellia is a terrible place to be from, can realize maybe Corellia is not a bad place to be from. That being born here doesn't mean she has to be nothing, because there's beauty beyond, even in her own planet. She gets to this very strange meeting where they're bidding on a strange object, and Qi'ra drastically undersells, embarrassingly undersells. Now, of course, it's not Qi'ra who does it. Proxima sends her with that bid. But now Qi'ra is where she doesn't want to be, not only in danger, but also looking incompetent. Now, this meeting itself is pretty interesting because the other people who are there. First of all, the droid Gatra. The droid Gatra are this strange group that have been mentioned in and out of new Star Wars canon for a while. They're also mentioned they're also in Last Shot by Daniel Jose Older, which is the other novel that came out in relation to Solo: A Star Wars Story. It was actually released before Solo: A Star Wars Story, so that was the lead-in novel, where this is kind of the novel that was, anyway, as I explained at the beginning. But they have also appeared in Kieran Gillen's Vader comics and a couple other places, and there's just this kind of strange group that's been hinted at of droids, basically this seemingly criminal organization run by droids, and we don't know what they're up to. We still don't really know what they're up to. I'm really hoping they get talked about more a lot in Star Wars canon. So it's always interesting whenever any of those droids pop up. And then we also have the Caldana Syndicate, which have less mysterious roots currently in Star Wars, but they've appeared in a few other things. But again, we're getting this tension brought up. The Caldana Syndicate have this kind of superiority complex, and they were counting on their bid being able to be lower because the people selling wouldn't sell to droids, the droid Gatra, and that they have this bias against droids, against aliens, against whoever. So again, that's getting set up. As Qi'ra was walking to the tram to get to where the meeting took place, she was noticing the luxury, that there were decorative fruit trees that could have doubled the amount of food that they had in the den, where they're literally eating like scooped up pests ground into like weird jello soup. So again, it's talking about the luxury class on Corellia in Coronet City versus the abject poverty that she lives in. And that's such a big part of her character. So as I said, the meeting went awry. Qi'ra had a plan to get out of the room. She's able to do that. She strategically sets it up so that they shoot, so that the window breaks, so it's a distraction, so she can get out of the room. And then she's running, and she's following somebody to try to pickpocket them so she can get money for a cab, but that doesn't work. So then she uses her code. She's able to go back into her mind and like somehow remember what the code was so that she can like get through the door and find her way to the sewers, and that's where we leave her in this chapter. I feel like there's more I could have talked about or gone on about, but odds are it will come up again in later chapters, and I've kind of kept you guys for a little while now. So that's where I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to try to release this video on Sundays. I'm going to see how that goes, how that fits with the schedule. I'll post in the community tab on the channel and in our Discord if that changes for any reason. But as of right now, just assume next week we're going to talk about chapters 3 and 4. We're going to talk about 2 chapters every week. So next week, chapters 3 and 4. Let me know in the comments what you thought about these chapters. I really hope you're going to take the time to read the book along with us. If you're not already, follow us on all the socials and join said Discord that I mentioned. And I will talk to you guys next week.